The morning I decided to stop pretending, I was sitting in a lawn chair in my son-in-law's backyard, watching him grill steaks he'd bought with my money, laughing, too loud at his own jokes, while my daughter refilled his beer without being asked. I had $2.3 million in a Fidelity account he didn't know existed. I had a paid-off commercial property on Route 9 that generated $6,800 a month in rental income. I had stock in 3 companies that my late wife, Dorothy, and I had quietly accumulated over 31 years of marriage, reinvesting dividends, never touching the principal, living like we earned less than we did. And I was sitting in that lawn chair, wearing a Walmart polo shirt and shoes I'd bought at a Goodwill in Ocala, Florida, pretending I needed them to float me a couple $100s for my electric bill. My name is not important. What matters is what I learned and what I did about it. Dorothy passed 16 months before that cookout. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We had time to say what needed saying, but not enough time. There is never enough time, and I will carry the weight of that until I'm gone myself. She was 64 years old. She played bridge on Tuesday nights and grew tomatoes on the back porch and knew how to listen in a way that made you feel like you were the only person in the world worth listening to. After she died, my daughter, I'll call her Renata, called me every day for the first month. My son-in-law, Dale, would sometimes get on the phone too, saying the right things in the way people say the right things when they don't especially mean them. They lived 40 minutes away in a subdivision outside of Gainesville. Nice house, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a pool they'd financed. Dale sold insurance and did well enough, but they spent like they did better than they did. Renata didn't work. She said she was focusing on the home, which meant she shopped online and redecorated rooms that didn't need redecorating. I want to be fair. For the first few months, they were kind to me. Renata would come over on Sundays and make dinner. Dale would help me with yard work. There was a warmth there that I needed, even if some part of me always felt it came with conditions I hadn't read yet. The first hint came about 4 months after Dorothy passed. I was having coffee at Renata's kitchen table on a Saturday morning when she slid a folder across to me. Inside was a printed document, a power of attorney form, already filled out with my name on it, designating Dale as my financial decision maker. "It's just a precaution, Daddy," she said. "In case anything happens to you, you're 67. It just makes sense to have these things in order." I looked at it for a moment. "I appreciate the thought," I said. "But I have an attorney already. I've got my affairs in order." "I know," she said, "but Dale thinks it would be simpler if we could just handle things directly. For efficiency." Dale, who was standing at the counter, didn't look up from his phone. "Let me think about it," I said. I thought about it for exactly as long as it took me to drive home. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had handled estate matters for Dorothy and me for over 20 years, and I told her what had happened. She wasn't surprised. She said she'd seen it before. She told me not to sign anything. I didn't. What I did instead was pay attention. Over the next several weeks, I noticed things I had been too deep in grief to notice before. The way Dale's eyes went to my watch, a good watch, a Tag Heuer I'd worn for 15 years, whenever I visited. The casual questions about the house situation, whether I'd thought about downsizing, whether I needed help managing the property Dorothy and I had owned outright in Lake City. The way Renata started calling less, and when she did call, the conversation always found its way to money somehow. What was I doing with my investments? Had I talked to anyone about retirement planning? Was I comfortable? I had an old friend named Walter, I should say, a different Walter than any you know, who had lost his wife 2 years before I lost Dorothy. He told me once, over a beer on my back porch, that grief makes you stupid. Not permanently, but for a while. It opens you up in ways you're not prepared for. He said his kids had borrowed $40,000 from him in the year after his wife passed, while he was still stupid with grief. He never saw a dime of it back. I thought about Walter a lot that spring. I had a decision to make, and it wasn't a small one. I could confront Renata directly, lay it all out, risk a blow-up that might never heal. I could simply pull back and say nothing, keep my distance, protect myself quietly. Or I could do what Dorothy, who was the sharper of the two of us in most things that mattered, would have done. I could be patient. I could watch. I could let people show me exactly who they were before I showed them anything at all. Dorothy used to say that the truth comes out in small moments, not big ones. She was right about that. as she was right about most things. So I started playing a role, not a dramatic one, nothing theatrical. I simply stopped correcting the impression they seemed to have of me, that I was an older man of modest means, living on Social Security and a small pension, scraping by in a house that was too big for one person. That impression had formed naturally. Dorothy and I had never been flashy people. We drove used cars. We cooked at home. We took vacations to state parks and rented cabins, not resorts. Our pleasure was in privacy and simplicity, not in display. I let that impression stand. I even nudged it, carefully, when the opportunity arose. I mentioned once that I was worried about my heating bill. I let Dale see me using a coupon at the grocery store. When Renata asked about my car, a 10-year-old Buick that ran fine, I sighed and said I'd been putting off a repair I couldn't quite afford. She nodded, sympathetic, and moved on. That fall, they asked if I'd consider selling the Lake City property and splitting the proceeds as a family. I said I'd have to think about it. I talked to Patricia, who confirmed what I already knew. That property was mine, had been in my name alone since we'd paid it off, and no one could touch it without my consent. I did not sell it. At Christmas, they gave me a gift card to a restaurant I don't particularly like and asked if I could contribute to the cost of Renata's new kitchen renovation. Not a loan. A contribution. We figured since you don't have grandchildren to spend money on, Dale said, smiling in that way of his. Maybe you'd like to invest in the home where you'll probably be spending a lot of your time. I looked at him. I looked at my daughter, who was looking at the floor. How much were you thinking? I asked. Whatever you're comfortable with, he said. I gave them $500. I told them it was most of what I had to spare that month. Renata hugged me and said thank you. Dale said it was really appreciated. I went home and sat in my kitchen for a long time. There had been a version of me, not long ago, who might have cried at that. A man 2 years out from losing his wife, sitting alone in a house full of her things, watching his daughter and son-in-law take $500 from him and call it a contribution. There was something in that moment that could have broken me if I had let it. Instead, I called Patricia and told her I wanted to start moving. Over the next 3 months, I made quiet changes. The Lake City property went on the market through a real estate attorney in a different city from where I lived. I consolidated accounts at a second institution Renata didn't know existed. I updated my will, removing language that had been put there years ago in a different time, when I had different assumptions about family. I was not cruel about it. I was not angry. I was precise. The confrontation I had not planned for came on a Wednesday afternoon in February. I had driven over to Renata's house to drop off some of Dorothy's jewelry that I'd finally sorted through. Pieces I'd decided to give away, a few to Renata, a few set aside for 2 cousins who had stayed close during the hard months. I knocked. Renata answered and let me in without much warmth. Dale was home, working from the dining room table, which meant not really working. I set the box of jewelry on the counter and started explaining what was inside. Renata opened the box and looked through it quickly, then looked up. "Is this all of it?" she asked. "It's what I set aside for you," I said. "Mom had a lot more than this." She did. "I've made some other arrangements for the rest." Dale closed his laptop. "What kind of arrangements?" I told him calmly that I'd donated some pieces to an estate sale benefiting a local hospice, which was true, and that I'd distributed others among family members, which was also true. "You gave Mom's jewelry to other people?" Renata's voice went sharp. "I gave some of it to family members who were close to her," I said. "We're your family. You are. Which is why you're getting what's in that box." Dale stood up. He had about 4 inches on me and had the habit of using that. He walked over to where I was standing near the counter. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said, "because I think somebody needs to be. You're not managing well. You're making decisions that don't make sense. That Lake City property, we heard it's on the market. You didn't even tell us." "It's my property," I said. "I didn't realize I needed to file a report." "Don't be like that. We're trying to help you." "I appreciate that. I don't need help with my property." Then Renata said the thing I will not forget. "Daddy, you're 68 years old. You're alone. You're not thinking clearly. Dale has offered again and again to help manage things, and you keep refusing, and honestly, it's starting to seem like you don't trust your own family." I looked at her for a moment. This was my daughter. I had walked her into kindergarten on her first day of school. I had sat beside her hospital bed when she had her appendix out at 14 and hadn't slept for 2 nights. I had danced with her at her wedding and genuinely liked Dale in those early years, when he was younger and had not yet become entirely what money makes some people become. "You're right that I'm alone," I said, "but I'm thinking clearly enough." Dale made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Clearly enough to sell off assets you've held for 20 years without talking to anyone." "I talked to my attorney." "Your attorney?" He shook his head. "Right. What happened next happened fast." Dale said something about how I was being difficult, that they had put a lot of time and energy into looking out for me, that the least I could do was be reasonable. I said I thought I was being very reasonable. His voice got louder. Renata started crying, which she did when arguments weren't going her way. Not from sadness, I'd learned, but from a kind of pressure tactic that had worked on me before and was working less and less. Then Dale put his hand on my chest. Not to push, not quite, more of a placement. His palm against my sternum, a physical assertion of something he didn't have the words for. I stepped back. I looked at his hand. I looked at him. "Don't do that again," I said. "I'm just saying, calm down. I am calm. And we're done for today." I picked up my keys from the counter where I'd set them and I walked out. I heard Renata saying my name as the door closed. I sat in the Buick in their driveway for a minute, watching my own hands on the steering wheel, and then I drove home. That night I called Patricia. I told her what had happened. I told her I was ready to finalize everything. The Lake City sale closed 3 weeks later. I won't give you the exact number, but it was a good sale, a fair market price in a county where prices had moved up considerably since we'd bought. The proceeds went directly into the account Renata didn't know about. A week after that I sold the Buick, which I had been planning to do anyway, and bought a used but well-maintained Lexus with cash. I had it detailed before I drove it home. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes after I parked it, just looking at it. Dorothy would have laughed and said I'd finally lost my mind, and then she would have asked if she could drive it. I also moved out of the house. This was the part I had thought about most carefully. The house was large for one person and full of memories that I needed some distance from. I sold it to a young family, a couple in their 30s with twin girls, and I watched them walk through the backyard pointing at things they were going to change, and I felt nothing but goodwill toward them. I kept a few pieces of furniture, Dorothy's reading chair, the kitchen table we'd bought at an antique sale in Asheville on our 20th anniversary. Everything else I sold or gave away. I bought a condominium in a 55-plus community on the west coast of Florida. It was not a modest condominium. It had a view of the water and a kitchen that was better than the one I'd cooked in for 30 years. The community had a pool, a fitness center, a weekly poker game that I joined within 2 months, and at which I am, I'll admit, reasonably good. I did not tell Renata and Dale any of this until it was done. When I called Renata to tell her, she was quiet for a long time. "You moved to Florida?" she said finally. "I did. When?" "Last month. And you didn't tell us." "I'm telling you now, Daddy." Her voice had gone soft in a way I recognized, the way it got when she was recalibrating. "We've been calling. You haven't been picking up. I've been busy." "With what?" "Settling in, unpacking, making some new friends. There's a poker group here I've taken a liking to." Silence. "I don't understand," she said. "What don't you understand?" "I thought you didn't have money for." She stopped herself up, but we were both sitting with what she'd been about to say. "I thought you didn't have money for that." "I've managed all right," I said. Dale got on the phone eventually. He asked about the house. Where was the money from the sale? Had I talked to anyone about investment options? Was I sure I hadn't made a hasty decision? I told him the money was handled. I told him I was very sure. I told him I had a financial advisor I'd worked with for years and everything was in order. "I just think," he said, "that you should be careful. There are people who prey on older folks who come into some money." "Dale," I said, "I want to say something to you, and I want you to hear it plainly." He waited. "I know what you and Renata have been doing for the past year. I've known for most of it. I want you to understand that I am not confused, I am not diminished, and I am not available to be managed. I am 68 years old, and I am in excellent health, and I have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life and leave something behind. You are not in my will in the way you may have assumed. That may change if things change between us, but it will not change based on pressure." He didn't say anything for a moment. That's not fair, he said finally. Maybe not, I said, but it's honest. Renata called back that evening. She was crying. The real kind this time, I thought, or at least a kind I hadn't heard before, without the structure of the other kind. She said she hadn't meant for things to go the way they had. She said she was sorry about the power of attorney, that it had been Dale's idea more than hers, which was probably partly true and partly not. She said she missed her mother and had been scared about me, and that fear had made her act in ways she wasn't proud of. I listened to all of it. I believed some of it. I told her I loved her, which was true, and that I wasn't going anywhere, which was also true, but that some things had to be different going forward. She asked what things. I told her, no more conversations about my finances, no requests involving my property or my accounts, no pressure, direct or sideways. I would be her father. I would show up, I would be present. But I would not be managed, and I would not pretend otherwise. She was quiet for a long time. Okay, she said finally. Okay, I said. It is 9 months later now. Renata and I talk on the phone most Sundays. She came down to visit in April and I took her out to dinner somewhere nice, a place on the water, and we talked about her mother for a long time, which we hadn't done enough of, and it was good. Dale did not come. He and I have not spoken since February. That may be permanent, or it may not be. I have found, at this age, that I am less interested in predicting things than I used to be. I play poker on Thursday nights with 5 other men who all moved to this part of Florida to do more or less what I did, to start a smaller, quieter, better version of the life they'd been living. One of them lost his wife 3 years ago. We don't talk about it much, but sometimes after the game, when the others have gone, we sit out on the screened porch and have a beer and watch the water, and it is enough. Dorothy would have had opinions about all of it. She would have had opinions about the condominium, and the Lexus, and the poker game, and especially about Dale, which she had kept to herself for years, and which, if I'm being honest, I probably should have listened to earlier, but I think she would have understood the choice I made. Not the anger of it, because there wasn't much anger. The clarity of it. The decision to stop being someone's idea of a soft target and start being, plainly and without apology, exactly who I had always been. I raised my glass to the water one evening last week, just before the sun finished going down. There was no one to raise it with, but it didn't feel like being alone. It felt like being exactly where I was supposed to be, after a longer road than it should have taken to get there. Some lessons cost more than they should, but you learn them and then you keep them, and then, if you're paying attention, you live differently because of them. That's the only thing I know how to call it. Not revenge, not victory, just a life taken back, held close, and finally lived right.